Welcome to Power Talks with Santosh Shah. Today we have with us Mr. Ian McFarlane, the representative of UNFPA in Nepal. The global economic crisis and continual terror attacks is definitely going to have a negative impact on development programs around the world. Mr. Ian, due to the recession, security challenges and logistical problems, to what extent Millennium Development Goals will be compromised?
I think that we don't fully yet understand the impact of the global financial crisis. How will it affect aid? How will it affect government spending? How will it have an impact on people's lives? From UNFPA's perspective, I think that we're very concerned that there are gaps already in aid flows in terms of support to reproductive health, population and gender. We know that the MDGs are still a challenge if we're to meet them. So we would hope that donors are still able to maintain the commitments that they've already made. In terms of government spending, again, it's the same issue. We need to make sure that spending is not shifted away from those kinds of priority actions which will have a real impact on the lives of people to achieve the MDGs. We know that there are some very straightforward and inexpensive strategies that can be employed to make sure that there's a lasting benefit for people. For example, family planning. Family planning is not an expensive way of dealing with development challenges. If we can encourage donors to continue to live up to their commitments, if we can continue to support governments prioritize on those issues which are really going to have an impact in people's lives, then I think there's a way of riding through the current crisis in terms of finance. But the global situation just reminds me how important development actually is. By ensuring that we do meet the MDGs, by working hard to reach the peace and development in countries around the world, that is a very effective way of actually addressing the root causes of financial crisis, or indeed insecurity, or global climate change. So there's an added urgency, I think, in this difficult time to keep focused on development.
In sensitive areas, we see that children and women are more affected. With the rise in terror attacks in most sensitive areas, does that limit the works of UNFPA, especially in terms of the security of staffs?
Well, of course, we have to make sure that all our staff are safe and that they can work in an environment which enables them to carry out their duties. It's very important for us then as an organisation globally, and of course with our particular partners in the UN system and with our government partners, that we make sure that those conditions are there. But I think it's, as you hint, actually very often those who suffer most from instability or insecurity are women and children. And therefore it's so important that we as UNFPA and with our partners work to make sure that their needs are not forgotten in times of instability or natural disaster. We really have to make sure that their needs are addressed properly.
Can you explain very briefly the key areas of UNFPA's works in South Asia and especially in Nepal?
Globally, and also of course here in South Asia and in Nepal, UNFPA seeks to help governments make sure that every birth is safe, every pregnancy is wanted, all young people are free from HIV and AIDS, and that all women are treated with dignity and respect. To do that, we work in 3 areas. We work in terms of reproductive health, we work in population, and we work in gender.
As I understand, UNFPA deals with several crucial issues, HIV/AIDS and emergencies, safe pregnancy, and a couple of other important issues. How do you incorporate all these issues when you deal with a society?
Well, I think it's very difficult sometimes to see different elements of our work as integrated. But from the perspective of the rural poor woman, they don't think in those terms. They think in terms of realizing their rights and their potential, of having access to the services that they need. So our job as UNFPA, working with civil society organizations, with government, with other partner organizations, is to make sure that we bring the perspective of gender. So how does it affect men and women? What are the impacts for men and for women? How do we make sure that data to design and follow up on projects is sensitive to the particular needs of men and or women, as well as young people and old people? So the way we try to integrate things is in response to the needs at the local level. And that means that we have to think very carefully about how our programs encourage a rights-based approach, how our programs help our partners to disaggregate their data, how our programs help government understand the links between issues of HIV or health are not just a straightforward sector. There are many dimensions to them. And so it's a multi-sectoral approach that is required. And UNFPA, and I think particularly the UN as a whole, is very well placed to help understand those multi-sectoral dimensions and therefore to integrate approaches that make a difference in the lives of women.
Normally we see that there is a common approach while formulating the development programs around the world. But when we look at the status of women and children, it differs from one nation to another, one culture to another. I mean, how much of brainstorming is done while formulating such programs?
I think that there's actually, particularly for us as UNFPA, there's an enormous amount of thinking that goes into making sure our programs are effective. Firstly, because we work in very sensitive areas. We work in areas that it's sometimes difficult to talk about. It's not easy to talk about pregnancy, about health, about women's rights, about HIV and AIDS. These are delicate subjects. So we're conscious of that. And the way that we go about it is, firstly, making sure that we draw on global best practice. And we have, as UNFPA, but also as the international community, we now have good examples of how to address those issues in a meaningful but sensitive manner. I think the other element to it is that we don't actually have a blueprint. We have an approach which says, listen to those whom you're there to assist. Don't judge. It's an approach which says that you have to understand the context of any particular country, or even within a country, there are a variety of contexts. You have to listen and understand that, and then bring your expertise to help that particular group or that particular country. One of the things that we've focused on is trying to find local allies. So that means that you look at who is working in an area, perhaps from a different religious group. What role for civil society in advocating for certain issues? It's more about a partnership approach. I think that also helps deal with issues and deflect the misconception, in my view, that we come as UNFPA with a set plan. We come to listen, we come to make sure that our programs are aligned with government's own programs and priorities. We always seek to build national ownership. I have a hope that we won't be here at some point in the future. We're not here on a permanent basis. We're not here simply to impose from outside. We're here to work with our partners to make sure that the goals that they want to achieve, particularly in our areas related to health and gender and population, are attained.
We'll continue with our conversation after a short break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Power Talks. We are in conversation with Mr. Ian McFarlane, the UNFPA representative in Nepal. What is the situation in Nepal regarding maternal health and women's access to reproductive health services?
I think it's a mixed picture. I think we should acknowledge a lot of progress and some important initiatives that government have begun. But if you look at the data, there are still some quite worrying signs, and it means that we still need to keep our attention focused on addressing women's health issues. For example, every day 6 women die giving birth in Nepal. That's 1 every 4 hours. We know that in terms of saving a woman's life during a pregnancy, during giving birth, it's very important to have skilled birth attendants. Yet in Nepal we still have only 1 in 5 women giving birth with a safe, trained attendant. And that's the average. For the poorest 20% of women in Nepal, it's only 1 in 20. So you can see that there are some important changes that have been made. We have the scheme for free delivery, free healthcare is a very, very important initiative led by government. But we have to look beyond the average towards those most marginalized, towards the poorest, and make sure that they're also getting access to these reproductive health services.
Nepal's population growth is still high, and it is estimated that by 2050, Nepal's population will be 50 million, with a higher percentage of youth population. As we all know, Nepal's governance is weak, and Nepal's political scenario is not favorable for development. How is UNFPA preparing Nepal's government to prepare for this huge bulge in population?
Well, firstly, I think government recognizes the need to understand population. And government has already initiated, for example, its preparations for the census. The census will be conducted in 2011, and that will enable government across all ministries and others too to use accurate data in terms of planning. So it's very important that people do understand the numbers. Secondly, I think government is also looking into the future. We've been helping government prepare a projection plan, an action plan as to the kinds of things that government should be thinking about as population grows. But the other thing that I want to stress is that there is a tendency sometimes to see population as just numbers, and to think about controlling those numbers. Interestingly, this year it's the 15th anniversary of the International Conference on Population and Development, and governments around the world, and UNFPA and others, are giving thought to what that means. The big shift from Cairo was to think not just of population being counting numbers, but about making sure that everybody counted. And that's quite a big shift. So when we talk about population growth, we shouldn't be thinking about stopping growth. We should be thinking about making sure that people have access to make the choices that they would like to make about the number of children that they have, or when they have those children. We should be thinking about how to anticipate the huge potential of young people. It should really be seen as a negative issue. I think it should be seen as an opportunity to grasp that can really propel Nepal, where if there is a talented, employed, educated youth, then the future could be very, very bright indeed for Nepal.
The last census we had was in 2001, and UNFPA will be leading the census in 2011. During this time, the issue of ethnicity in Nepal has become a prime focus. Will there be an objective to recognize the ethnic diversity of Nepal in 2011 census?
Absolutely. And UNFPA is leading the support to government's census. So I don't want to leave people with the impression that UNFPA is doing the census. Government is doing the census with some help from us. And one of the ways we help government is to understand the technical quality that you need in a census, if a census is to be credible. Clearly, understanding with accuracy the mix of different ethnic groups, the different ages, the different employments, the different movements of people is part of having a good census. And I hope that we can help government make sure that they have the best census they've ever had, and one which really reflects all of the citizens of Nepal, and then helps government and citizens understand what they can do to further their own development.
Nepal is one of the least populated countries in South Asia, yet we have a clear distinction between urban youths and rural youths. Do you have a separate approach while you deal with urban youth and rural youths?
I think you have to, although here in Nepal, UNFPA tends to work more with the rural youth than with the urban youth. But that's not a distinction that should really be made. And of course we work at the national level, looking at youth issues across the country, whether that's rural, urban, whether it's young girls or young boys. All of those issues related to our mandate, we try to help government understand and plan appropriately and then implement appropriately to make sure that young people, wherever they are, from whichever ethnic group they're from, whatever their talents are, that we make the most of those.
Can you briefly explain me what was the objective behind formulating the United Nations Youth Advisory Panel that came out from the UN country team?
That's one of the ways in which the UN, I think, is demonstrating its commitment to work with young people. Globally, UNFPA has led agencies in using young people or having networks established whereby we can interact with young people, firstly to better shape our own response, but secondly also to enable us to reach out to young people and to deepen our relationship with young people so that we really do consciously make a difference for them. So the UN country team here, under the leadership of the resident coordinator, has indeed set up a youth advisory panel precisely with that in mind, to understand, to listen from young people, and also to improve the way in which we work with young people. We've tried to configure it in a particular way, of course, and I think it's important to note that we're not just dealing with any young people. We've deliberately chosen to work with youth groups who work, for example, with the media, youth groups who are working with people living with HIV and AIDS, young people who are from marginalized communities, young people who face challenges because of their disabilities. It's a deliberate attempt not just to work with young people, but to work with young people from those groups of society that perhaps need their voice to be heard a little bit more than it currently is.
It's very inspiring to know that United Nations has opened up to get advices from the young generation. We'll continue with our conversation after a short break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Power Talks. We are in conversation with Mr. Ian McFarlane, the UNFPA representative in Nepal. Nepal has achieved 33% seats in the Constituent Assembly for women. India has its first women speaker. These are success stories. But in South Asia, girl child education is still a challenge. How difficult is it to cross the cultural barriers of not sending the girls to school?
I mean, I think it's obviously quite difficult because this is an issue that has been discussed over some years now. And the reason it's discussed is because we know that educated girls who stay in education longer, are more likely to have a constructive, productive impact in their communities and their societies. We know that, for example, here in Nepal, almost a fifth of girls aged between 15 and 19 have been pregnant or are pregnant. The risks associated with pregnancy are much higher for those younger girls. So addressing the issue of girls' education is really very, very important and very significant. And I think that not just UNFPA, but actually a number of UN agencies are all working together to see what we can do in that regard. But I think there's a broader question. Girls' education and girls in school is part of the picture, but there's a much deeper discrimination against women. I think it's fantastic that you have achieved 33% representation in the Constituent Assembly. I hope that you'll have equivalent amounts, if not higher, in other mechanisms and structures in Nepal. And I say that not because it's about numbers, but the quality of decision making, empowering women, enables all of us to do so much better in the development tasks that we have ahead. There's also a deep concern that I have about the scope of violence against women, and this is also part of this discrimination against women. There's discrimination against girls in terms of education. We know there's discrimination in terms of women's roles in decision making and in power. And we know that women are the victims of violence against them. And it's very difficult to find accurate data to substantiate that point. But we carried out a survey in 2 districts, and the levels were really, really high. Nearly 3/4 of the women had faced some violence against them. Now, that, from any person's perspective, can't be right.
Which districts were they, the 2 districts?
There were 2 districts. In one district it was Suket, and it was in Dang. And it was in 2008. And that's not necessarily saying that all districts are the same. And I don't want to give that impression, but I do feel, and I think this is shared by others in government as well, that we do have very high levels of violence against women in a post-conflict situation, but also I think it's something to do with this discrimination and the practices that we have here in Nepal. Very difficult issue to address. Can't be done by somebody like me coming from outside and talking about it. It has to be generated from within Nepali society, and it's great to see lots of women's NGOs or advocacy groups speaking out about this issue. It's great to see the Ministry of Peace and Reconstruction developing a plan for implementing work that will stop the violence against women. But it's going to take a lot of time, it's going to take a lot of patience, and it's going to take a lot of commitment from men. And I think these are things that it's difficult to talk about, it's difficult to accept, but we're here as the UN to try and help understand, plan how to respond, and make people aware of some of these difficult challenges that we face. So I think if we get girls' education right, if we get women's representation right, if we start treating all women with dignity and respect, then we're really going to have a bright future for Nepal.
When you try to access the women population, how difficult is it in societies which are strongly conservative or religious?
It's kind of difficult, but actually the women themselves are often extremely eager and keen to participate. So we have an ally in the women themselves. One of the things that we try to do when we work in conservative societies, and there are many of those around the world, is to enter the dialogue with a sense of respect, enter without judgment, listen, try to find common ground. And there are examples of in different parts of the world where we have worked with different faiths, where we have worked with different traditions. And I'm confident that if you approach it in the right way, again, this spirit of partnership and openness, willingness to discuss based on evidence, you can always make some changes for the better for all. And it's not about necessarily taking away from existing cultures, but it's about fulfilling all of the possibilities within a culture.
Ian, you touched on a very important subject earlier. For a society to develop, women's freedom and dignity needs to be ensured. But in Nepal and in most part of the world, we see that women are rather subjected to violence, abuse and suppression. Why is it so difficult to raise the issue of gender-based violence?
Number of reasons. I think one reason is women themselves don't feel that they can speak with confidence about what has happened to them because of the environment in which they're living. They're frightened, they might be hurting, it might not be easy to find a way of talking about that. Secondly, I think that we don't always have the services available to help. So the services provided by the state in terms of counselling, in terms of medical attention. So we need to make sure that those are there too. And thirdly, I think it really is an attitudinal issue. It's a change that is very complicated, deep-rooted, that will take a long time. Unfortunately, it's taking too long to actually address. And I think in that, it's about using the examples where success has been achieved. It's about engaging men as well as women in the process. This is not an issue for women alone. This is an issue we have to talk to men about this. We have to make them feel that there is a value in avoiding that kind of practice. And we have to build an environment in the society where we can provide the support that is required to address those needs when they happen, punish them when they do happen, ensure there's access to justice. These are issues that are part and parcel of development but are not necessarily the easiest to do. I think there's no question that we have to do it.
Let us hope that someday we have a society where a woman's identity is respected and their dignity is protected. With this hope, I wish you good luck and goodbye. See you next week, the same time. Thank you for being with us.